And so he says, yeah, we're going to give you 150,000. And he walks up to the door and closes it. And he says that this is on condition that you'll sleep with me. And he said, every woman that has worked in this school has slept with me. And I said to him, I cannot do that. I am a believer. And we just went on to this verbal fight. And then he became violent. And then out of the blue, this girl comes knocking on the door. And I walked out. And then I said to him, I said, somehow I knew that God would come and defend me against you. And I said to him, today I am poor, but I want you to understand that I'm not a desperate person.
Welcome, everybody. This is Simon Gilbert with Inspired. Great to be back for another wonderful week of stirring testimony and inspiration. If you're new to us, Inspired is all about amidst the relentless bombardment of negativity, cynicism, and bad news. It's meeting friends of mine from all across the spectrum of life experience, all across the world, and who've got stories in which God has been powerfully at work. And I've got no doubt this week you're going to be massively inspired because we've got with us Racheal Mutesi. Welcome, Racheal.
Thank you, Simon. It's lovely to be here, and thank you so much for having me. Yeah. I feel inspired being here already.
Brilliant. Well, Racheal, you're in a slum right now, so if we have some noises going on, that's a bit of context. But Racheal's story is a massive encouragement to me because, well, on lots of levels. But she was a World Vision sponsored child, and that's encouragement to me because we, in our work in Burundi, we sponsor our organisation about 100 children, and they're orphans. I mean, you weren't orphans, but you had a really, really very difficult life. And, from there, you've just been able to study at Oxford at university. You've been over in England, but I also love the fact that you didn't choose the Western life. You've chosen to go back and be involved with the most vulnerable people in society. And you were born in Ginger. I don't know if you can picture it at the Bujagali Falls. I'm sure you can. Bujagali Falls, Racheal. I think I've still got the record of the most bungee jumps in Uganda in one day. We went up there to do some filming for a radical discipleship series, and so the motif, if you like, was the bungee jump. And I thought I'd just do 2 or 3, but in the end, the filmmaker made me do 8 in one day. I was absolutely knackered by the end of it. So I've got great memories of Ginger, but even in sharing that, feels a bit flippant because I guess I saw the beauty and the rich side of Ginger, whereas your experience was very, very different, wasn't it? So listen, let's get into your story. Enough by means of intro. You're born in Ginger, and just give us your backstory.
Yes, my name, as introduced, is Racheal Mutesi, and married to Calvin Jr. Mkiza. And I was born in Ginger. Ginger is the eastern part of Uganda, which is also the source of the Nile. That's very important to hear. Yeah. And a very beautiful place, I must say. And I was born there, but we moved quickly to Kalere because 5 months after I was born, my parents separated. And I think there could have been many reasons, but I suspect that one, because my mom was coming from a very poor family, and my father was coming from a well-to-do kind of family. I mean, not as rich as families in the UK, but on an African scale, like way richer. Yeah. My mom was deemed to be ugly by the entire family, and I have features quite like my mom's. So I was an ugly baby, very tiny, very dark-skinned, and clearly not loved. And so we moved to Kalere, which is a slum, and where I have lived all my life in January 1991. And like any other slum, I don't know how familiar you are, but slums normally develop around urban centers, and it's where the poor people basically stay. And there are many slums in Kampala, probably 7 of them, but Kalere is one of the poorest. And Kalere grew because there is a farmer's market, a big farmer's market. So all farmers in Uganda bring their produce in Kalere, and then they distribute the food across the capital, which is Kampala. And so that has, over the years, brought in so many people. But when I was growing up in the 90s, it was basically a swamp, which people were encroaching on at that time. Very, very poor. Most of the houses were made out of mud, so there were flooding, there were no toilets. People would just defecate wherever they wanted. That's sorry I use that word. And there was a lot of crime. Everything you can think of that is bad was happening. And my mom moved to this place where there was a school. but also there was a local church. So her cousin had invited her because I think she just wanted to save her from the embarrassment and the shame and stigma that comes with being divorced. And so she invited her to come and stay and work here. And my mom worked, she had a certificate in nursery teaching. So she was offered a job to work as a nursery teacher. And we stayed in a school store, which was basically a mud house. But even though it was mud, still there were holes in the house. It was a school store. You had broken chairs, there were rats, in the night they would come and feast on your feet and barely had enough to eat. And that's where I started from. Yeah.
Mm. So your father wasn't interested at all in you, is that right?
That's what I think. I mean, I don't know the backstory. I just try to speculate what happened. But I know that from my grandfather, at least he knew that they always despised his daughter, who is my mom, because of where she was coming from, her poor family, and also because I had him say that because I thought she wasn't beautiful enough. And like I said, my mom she's a very dark-skinned woman and very tall and thin, which is not a very attractive thing in our part of the world. So I think, yes, and he resented me. But also I need to say that as a very sickly child, so I think at the back of his mind, he thought I would die anytime in a way. So he never invested. And I didn't look like him, like I've said.
And
yeah.
I've been in slums in Bujumbura, and you got was it similar? You got sewage running through the houses. Was it like that for you?
Yeah.
And so
right now it's raining, but it was a nightmare. And I can sit here and tell you many children that just drown in the night because our rain in this part of the world is not like the rain in the UK. So sometimes the water is actually warm, Yeah. So if it rained and the water started entering the house and you're sleeping, you can pretty much feel like maybe you're just doing a wee on your bed. And then for smaller children, many of them would die like that. But others, they would be like real draining because, like I said, this was a swamp, a wetland, and then which was uncrushed on, and there was no any preparation whatsoever. People just kept on coming in, and it's still a problem even up to now. But you can imagine in the early 90s.
Yeah. So when is it that World Vision took you on as a sponsored child?
So in the early 90s still, I think actually the program had started in 1989 through a priest called Reverend Kaiso. He's now retired. But he had been to Ireland and he met a group of people and then he lured them to come and sponsor the children in Calais. So I should say that everyone who wanted to go to school went to school through the local school. And later on, the school was named Community Primary School. So it's like World Vision sponsored 1,000 children or plus. And I just happened to be there. And so we were enrolled into the program. But I think because my mom stayed at the school where they had a small office, and she was like the connection between the community and World Vision officers. And so we somehow knew, and we knew about the existence. So I think we received special treatment by the fact that we were just near the officers. So I have a collection of dolls I have gathered over the years, but because someone would come in with a teddy bear or a small doll and they would hand it over to me. They would give us pencils, candies, and all that. But yeah, what I'm trying to say is that the gift to education was for everybody. And so they paid tuition for everyone who wanted to join. And that's how I started up in life, yeah. And so they did that until I finished my primary school. And then I had to move on from there.
And you came to faith as a young child. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I came to faith through a bowl of rice. So, like I have explained this place, people opted for Calais because it was cheap food. That's why the population is here. Like I said, farmers bring their produce here. But even then, I remember my mom worked for a salary of 20,000 shillings. It's about £5. Wow. I have an older sister and a younger brother. So you can imagine if you're buying food for children and you have to pay some rent, and that's barely nothing, right? And so we struggled to get food. And I remember the days where, and I don't say this to respect my mom, I think she's phenomenal. She did an amazing job raising the three of us, But I think that I knew that we struggled. So there were times where you had like a potato, sweet potato, those big potatoes, right?
Yeah.
And we would have like salt to make gravy. So you get water and put it in salt, and then you would use that as gravy, and you have a potato, and then you go to sleep. And it was enough, but we always longed for a better meal. And what World Vision did is that they would have center days on Saturday. So Monday to Friday we went to school, but then on Saturday they would invite us and they would teach us songs. And I remember this particular year they were teaching us a song called "Shine Jesus Shine," because the diocese organized this thing called Celebrate Jesus, and kids from Calera would not attend, so World Vision chipped in, and so we had these center days would come and sing every Saturday in preparation for this event. And every Saturday we came, they would give us a bowl of rice, you know. So we would shine Jesus shine, and then you had the rice. So at this particular time at that Celebrate Jesus, I just thought, you know what, I want to become a Christian. And then I know that I just went back home and I thought, you know, guys, I've become a Christian. And I went back to school and said, I've become a Christian. And that's how it all started. And I was 9 years old. And then, I just picked so much interest. Prior to that, I used to go to church. I was like a nominal Christian. You went to church because we only had beef at home on Sunday. And the only way you qualified was to go to church. So I kept on going. But there was something different about that experience that I went back and I knew that something different had happened. And I would then live my life later on to tell people about what had happened through that experience.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because literally that there is an expression, rice Christians, and that is people that come to faith or supposed faith just so they, because they're given food. But clearly that wasn't you, because you were radically transformed, weren't you?
Yeah, I was. I mean, I was 9 years old and I went back to school and I stood to be the religious prefect, which meant you were in charge of Christian affairs at school. And I was that until I finished my A-level. Every school I went to, I was known as the evangelist, the preacher. And I was very passionate because also, I don't know, at the time you lived in Burundi, but in the 90s, there was a radical revival of Pentecostalism in Uganda. Mm-hmm. So pastors, especially Muslim pastors that had converted from Islam, right, would hold crusades, and they would come and preach about this Jesus who is the way and truth and life. Many times were mocking the Muslims. I look back and I think, some of this wasn't done right, but they were just filled with the power of the Lord and so much passion, and they wanted to say. And I became that pastor, right? I would go back home and bring together stones and form a pulpit. So I would have all my little friends collect stones. And then I would have these young congregation of children, and I'd start shouting whatever the pastor said at the crusade I attended, which I would always run to go and see them, preach. And, African pastors are quite animated, right? Yeah. And I loved it. And I would go and hear everything they said, and I would come back and say it. And I started reading God's word. Like I said, I became a leader right on, and a faith leader. And that's what I was known for from that time. And I think for me also, the other thing is, like I said, I was a very sickly child. And then because I was sickly, I was always sad. I was always withdrawn, what you could call a crybaby. And I think this transformation came with a sense of joy. I just became the happiest child that I could be. And I think probably because I just enjoyed what I did, telling everyone about faith. And my mom will tell you that the only complaint she ever got from school about me was she read the Bible a lot and she preached the gospel a lot. My sister, it was always she cut her skirt or she had a fight with the teacher. For me, it was always, she's reading the Bible so much. And I memorized so many scriptures, learned so many hymns. And, I was just all over the place with Jesus. And then also because the other thing that happened also, I think I got a sense of hope, a hope that no one could understand, because the truth is my situations in Calera had not changed, right? I was still this poor girl who saw her friends die, time and again, either because they were hungry or diarrhea or all these diseases, malaria and all that. I was a child who knew about sex violence and gang rape and all those things. But somehow I remained hopeful, and I thought that, the Lord will keep me safe, at least until I went to heaven, but also that he would keep me and I would be someone different on earth. And I think he has kept that, till now.
Yeah. I know you said that by the time you turned 20, half your school friends had died, many of them from diarrhea, dysentery, malaria. And your dad said of you, didn't he, that you surprised him because he thought you'd die. He didn't expect you to carry on living. So your academic journey, obviously you're top, well, by the dint of how far you got, you identified as a great pupil. You were very intelligent. Your uncle David was significant, wasn't he?
Yes, he is. So my mom has a brother called David. And so I don't know if it happens everywhere elsewhere, but in Uganda, World Vision works in a community for 10 years and then they relocate to another village and support that community. So time came when World Vision was phasing out. And it was just hard, my mom with all the little resources she had, she couldn't keep us, but she wanted us to have a good education. So was my uncle David. But my uncle was lucky that he had opportunities always to work in very good schools. And I remember when I finished primary 6 and I was moving on to primary 7, he said to my mom, I want Racheal to come to this school. He was working in a school called St. Henry's. And at that time it was the best in their district. And he brought me in there and he took me for an interview at the beginning of the year. And they wanted to get like a distinction in every subject. And I did, I had a distinction in social studies. I had a distinction in science. I had a distinction too, which is like A minor in English. And then I had an F in mathematics, and my uncle taught mathematics. And the head teacher there said to him, we cannot allow your daughter to be in school. And my uncle said that Racheal is a brilliant girl. Just give her a chance. I'm sure she would perform. But this is the last year in primary school. So he put me aside and said, Racheal, I've asked these people to put you in class, but I want you by May, when we do the mock exams, I want you to have a distinction. I want you to promise that you're going to work hard and get a distinction in math. And I said to him, fair enough, that's a good deal. And then he said to me, if you do so, I will buy you a tray of eggs and I'll get you a chapati for a whole month. And I thought, what a deal. Eggs was unheard of in our household. And so I went and I worked so hard. I could go to him for discussions. He helped me make good friends in this particular school. And by the time the mock exams came, I was the best in the district. And this is like the second best district in Uganda in terms of academics.
Wow.
And when the time came at the end of the school year, well, I didn't get an A+. I got like a D2, which is like A-. And that also set me up for the Perth to know that I could work hard. And together with mom, they kept on contributing to our education, for me and my sister. And, like they say, the rest is history.
You had an occasion, didn't you, when, we've got examples of this in Burundi as well, where a teacher tried to force you to sleep with him. Is that right?
Yeah, so when I finished my high school, so my A-levels, I had done physics, economics, and mathematics. And at that time, the government was starting to sponsor especially female students who did science subjects. But I think I was more gifted in the humanities, things like history, divinity, or Christian religious education and literature. But the only way I would get a government scholarship is if I did science subjects. So I was kind of like encouraged to do sciences. I wasn't bad, but I wasn't the best. And so when the results returned, I had not got the marks that would make me get a scholarship from the government. And I knew my mom had just taken my sister into paramedical school and there was no money, right, to help me continue with my education. And so I opted to work. And so I had taught from Sunday school from the age of 11, so I knew how to teach children. So I got jobs in primary school, and for 7 different schools, I worked. And I could not be paid. And I kept on leaving because it was pointless for me to work without pay. And then this particular last school I got, they asked me to be a school matron. And so I decided to be that. And, when you're matron, you take care of the little girls. And we had quite a number. We had like 50 children in boarding school. That's between the ages of 3 to 12. And I would clean them and do everything. But I was friendly and I enjoyed it. I love children. And so at the end of the month, this guy invites me to his office and he was paying me 80,000 shillings. So that's about probably £20 or less than £20. And And he says, Racheal, you've been amazing with the children. We think that we want to keep you. At that time, I was already teaching them. I would help them with their homework and all. And so he says, we want you to come and teach mathematics. And we are going to increase your salary from 80,000 to 150. Now, remember, I wanted to save money for a year for me to be able to join university. And so he says, yeah, we're going to give you 150,000. And at this time, he walks up to the door and closes it. And he says, but this is on condition that you'll sleep with me. And he said, every woman that has worked in this school has slept with me. And he says, so you can decide. We can either do it now here, or you can decide a place. Now, like I said, from the age of 9, I was a Christian, and I was not just a Christian in words. I was a Christian. I tried to follow the Lord in the best way I know. And one of those ways meant actually sexual purity. It meant that I was not going to sleep with anybody until I got married. And so, but then Calera gave me a lot of challenges that would have pushed me to sleep with anybody. I mean, like when we didn't have food or we didn't have basics at home, that was reason enough. And I saw many of my friends do that. And now the Lord had kept me up to through high school. And now this guy is telling me, oh, this is what you have to do for you to get to university. And I said to him, I cannot do that. I am a believer. And we just went on to this verbal conversation, a verbal fight, if I am to say, just saying, I cannot do this and I'll do it. And then he became violent. And I just remember being in that place and feeling just disappointed. And, like when you think that God is going to come through and then it's like 30 minutes on and then you feel like nothing is happening. And this is a big guy. I'm a very small person, Well, right now I'm a little bit fat, but I used to be a very tiny human being. And so we're having this fight and he's knocking. And then out of the blue, this girl comes on the door. And there was an emergency at the school. I don't know what it was. And he's like, Master, please come out. I saw you walk in. We need something. And then this guy just went into a panic. And then he pushed me to the door and I walked out. And then I said to him, somehow I knew that God would come and defend me against you. And I said to him, today I am poor, but I want you to understand that I'm not a desperate person. And I said to him, I'm going to leave this school. You can keep your money. And I said to him, but the next time you see me, you won't believe it because God would have done something better in me.
Amen.
And so that's how I got the courage to leave. And I went back to the dormitory. I packed everything I had and I went away. And I said, I didn't want to go back home because I knew my mom would be very disappointed. And so I went to stay with my uncle. And my uncle and his wife are the most entrepreneurial people I've ever met. And so while there, my auntie taught me, my uncle's wife taught me how to knit, crochet, embroidery, make samosas and all that. And so when the academic year came, I decided that I would go back home. And for the years I was in university for 3 years, every day, my mom and I woke up at 3 a.m. to make samosas. Wow. And would make them. And then I'll take them to the market to sell and I'll be on my way to university. And just so the grace of God. And I was able to finish school.
Incredible. Whew. Well done. Seriously. Hey folks, looking ahead to 2024, I'm planning my speaking schedule. So whether it's a Sunday service or men's breakfast, evangelistic event, youth, whatever, do get in touch at info@greatlakes.outreach.org. And hopefully I, myself, or one of our team of great speakers at Great Lakes Outreach will be able to come along and share with you. Get in touch, info@greatlakes.outreach.org. Maybe see you next year in the flesh. Let's get back to the podcast. So you went to Makerere, which is a good university in Uganda, but you ended up at Oxford University. How on earth did that happen?
So during my time at university, like I said, I was working, making samosas in the morning. But then I was volunteering with a charity, Christian organization called World Shine Ministries. And basically I was there for evangelism. And I went to every school in this country. Every weekend we were somewhere, preaching the gospel. And in 2012, there was a team that came from Norfolk. And we were doing a mission somewhere in Western Uganda. And we were preaching. And I was just helping out. I wasn't doing anything special. And this team from a church in Newton Fortman thought I was amazing. And so they thought, we can bring you into the UK and serve. But then it was a very small church and they didn't know what I would do during my time there for a whole year. So they reached out to Youth for Christ and said, would you want to have Racheal volunteer? And Youth for Christ decided to sponsor my time. So I came to the UK to work with Youth for Christ as a volunteer in Norwich. And then, but in November, the pastor who runs the organization Walshine was coming for a conference. It's called Healing of the Nations Conference, and it was going to be held in Derbyshire. So the local pastor and Newton Floatman, Adrian Miller, said, would you want to come and be a part of this conference? So I went to this conference, and at the conference I met Amy's parents, John and Hatmat Kopsh. And Hatmat is a pastor and a Bible teacher, and by far I know he's one of the best I've listened to. So I'm listening to this gentleman for 3 days. And then at the end of the conference, Reverend Adrian says to me, Racheal, would you want to do a closing prayer? Now, you know that there is a difference between a prayer from the West and a prayer from Africa. You know that, right? Our prayer is another sermon. So when someone says, come and do a closing prayer, they're like, oh, will you come and preach again? So innocently, I go to lead this prayer, and from 1 minute to about 40 minutes, I think they must have been disappointed because because this is like 10 p.m. in the night. And I just went on, everyone, first close your eyes and hands together. And then everyone has their hands up. And then Dr. Hatmet, Amy's dad, comes to me and says, that's what they call a closing prayer. And then he said, the call of God upon your life is remarkable. God has called you to be a fearless evangelist and all the things. And so when he was leaving the next day, he said to me and his wife, would you want to come and visit us? And so I went and visited them, and we just talked, we shared our stories, we talked about what God had done and all that, the things. And then finally, they took me to Cheltenham. So Amy Ewing, these are her parents, so they took me to Cheltenham to hear her speak. Mm-hmm. And she was speaking on the topic, what does the Lord require of you? And it's to love, mercy, seek justice. And she was commenting particularly what it meant walking humbly with God. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking to myself, I've never seen a woman preach like this one, so powerfully with clear content, so much clarity. I mean, like I was just there the whole time. And then I could hear her. And then because I'd watched her father speak for 3 days, I was like, she speaks exactly like her dad. Mm-hmm. And I knew that I wanted to be like her. I wanted to be able to communicate. And I wanted to be trained. I wanted to be the woman who has qualified to be at that platform, but also faithful, to study hard and to speak like Amy, basically. And so at the end of the day, so they said to me, I think you're gifted to be an evangelist, and we want you to come and do this program at the OCA. At that time, I never heard about the OCA. I'd never heard about apologetics and all that. And so, almost like a skeptic, I'm coming from Calais, so you're telling me Oxford. I'm like, okay, I know I came to the UK, but I'm not crazy enough to think that this can happen. And so I do the application, and the last day when I'm going to do an interview, in my first year in the UK, I'd met a lady, she's also a Reverend, Amanda Marshall, and I was telling her I wasn't ready for the interview, but because I don't want to, disappoint Amy's parents, anyone would go for it. And Amanda looked at me and said, from the first time I knew you, I know that you were anointed, you were called, and you cannot back down because everyone thinks you're already a trained minister. And so she encouraged me, and I went and did the interview. And I remember it was Sharon Dorricks and Simon Edwards that interviewed me. And I remember when they said, what is apologetics? I said to them, I don't know what apologetics means because I didn't even take the time to know. But I said, Amy's father said, if I train like that, I'm going to be a better evangelist.
So tell us what OCA is.
So the OCA is the Oxford Centre for Christian Apologetics, and it's basically a place where people come to be equipped on the basics and fundamentals of Christian apologetic theology, and being able to get an understanding of why we believe what we believe, and being equipped with the right answers so that when we go about to speak to people, they know what we believe, and we can present to them a Jesus with clarity. I'm failing on my words there, but I think that it's just a place where you train in the right doctrine and how to present the gospel in a better way, mostly an intellectually satisfying way. But also, I think what I found at the Oka was the relationships that people built there that molded, a life of walking with the Lord.
Yeah, brilliant. Any highlight moments from Oka days?
Yeah, so many really. I mean, I love the missions, being able to go and preach the gospel. I remember when we went to Kent, we were using the church facility inside the university, but then there was another student facility. And we were there for 3 days and no one was coming through until we talked to the student community and said, oh, we have another center. If you can go there and speak to the leadership there, and then they can tell you what we've been doing. And then we moved to that particular student place and we're able to go to clubs in the night and meet where the students were. And for the first 3 days, we didn't have anyone come to the Lord. And then on the last day, we had about 57 students come to faith.
Wow.
And that was really magical for me to see, because remember, I'd been to the UK the year before, and it was unheard of to see 57 university students come to faith that week. So that was really, really special. Time with the lecturers. I mean, just seeing people like Amy, Sharon, Vince Vitali, and having a chance to know their lives and have conversations with them. I think that was a highlight. Also, coming from the slum to such a community, it felt very safe. Waking up in the morning, you don't have to worry because somebody's going to break into your door. So I think that was special for me, to be in a place of safety. And this is what I always say, that I left Oka, or I came to the Oka when I was just purely an evangelist who just cared about sharing the gospel. And I think as I shared my stories, people would see the absurdities. And that when I came back, my heart had moved from just preaching the gospel, but actually living out for the gospel. And so in a way, I came as just a preacher. And now I am a preacher who also does social work. And so I think that was the difference from my coming, before coming and returning to the UK, that my heart was opened up to the injustices and the inconsistencies that was in my world, which I thought were normal. And then every time I shared, I would share stories of when, for example, a girl was gang raped. And if you've been in the slum, we use a lot of humor, I would be laughing away and you could see terror in everyone's face. Mm. And so those things made me question the things that I thought were normal, and I wanted to keep them as normal. And when I returned, I wanted to change the status quo. And so part of my mission has been, or has changed, to actually take care of children that are neglected, children particularly who have suffered from sex violence, and be a voice for them as well.
Yeah.
The mark must have happened there in the UK. I didn't see that to be any different. And, when you grow up in places like here, and somehow you normalize being called a thief or a prostitute. And so even when you see a child prostitute, it doesn't really bother you. And I think for me, after the Oka, those things really started bothering me a big time. Mm. Yeah.
I love the fact that, often there's brain drain. So from the UK perspective, for example, the NHS is run, basically survives because we've sort of stolen almost all the best nurses and doctors from Africa and also Asia. And lots of people come, get education, and then they stay in the West when they are the best of these developing countries. And you are, so gifted, and you could have stayed, you could have had a comfortable life in the West, but praise God, you knew God's calling your life. You've gone back to your very own slum. You've started a group called Ufahari Girls Ministry. I don't know if your Kirundi is any good, sort of Bantu languages. That's Swahili for valuable. We would say agate kabigeme. Would you understand that?
No.
But we've even, as you've been talking, been hearing this precious little girl screaming in the background. I don't know if she's one of yours, but basically there's been a huge amount of sexual violence and abuse of little girls, isn't it? Tell us about what you've been led into.
Yeah, like I said, I grew up experiencing this. I remember one girl, I was 11 and she was my friend, but she wasn't a good girl, really typical slum child. Sometimes parents abandoning her and stuff. And I remember the boys in my community would take a bait on what they thought was the most beautiful girl. And then they would lure her into a room and they would pay 50,000. So one guy goes after her and they'll give her money. And so if he convinces this girl to go into the room, then he takes all the money, and then these boys use this girl. And this particular girl, about 10 boys abused her. And the last guy decided that he would push the condom he used in her body. And my mom is a teacher, and she's like a strong, I don't know if you know those big African women, quite tall, and they have a presence, she's a matriarch. And so girls like that always came at home, and this girl came at home, and she shared this story. And at that time, I remember, because this is me at 11, I remember, oh, this is normal, this happens. She was just in the wrong place, dealing with the wrong boys. And I remember from that time, everyone just named her to be the village prostitute, and no one challenged the boys. None of those were arrested, and you could hear stories of those. But like I said, at that time it was normal. It's until I come back now, I'm telling people in the UK these things, and they're thinking, okay, that's really bad. And so when I came back, my heart was open to that. And so I started looking out which are some of those children, because I started teaching Sunday school when I was 11 years. Some of these children that I've taught, they're out of school and no one can give a reason why. And in I don't know if you know, but there is a research that shows that girls who are out of school are 3 times likely to be abused than those who are in school. And so I started saying, why are these girls out of school? And then when COVID happened, another world was open to me, where I was open to the idea of parents who are prostituting their children in exchange for food. And right now we have 11 girls that we have in our care. Sadly, the one crying is not ours. We have our girls in boarding school, so they return in December. But each of those girls, the story was my mother brought a man to sleep with me so that we get a kilogram of rice for us to survive. Or my grandmother sent me to my uncle to get food and this. And then we have a girl where they sent her to a bar. This girl is 8 years old. She was sent to a bar to work. And why was she working? So that her father would come and get free alcohol. And so my world has been open to this. And I asked myself, what does the Lord require of us? The Lord requires us to have mercy. And showing mercy means that going and drawing them out of those communities and finding safe alternatives for them.
Oh, the picture you paint is so grim. So your methodology is to take your 20-some girls who have been sexually abused and you get them out into boarding schools, away from it. Does that mean that everyone in the slum every girl is being sexually abused?
Most of them. So the thing about African culture, there is a lot of secrecy around sex violence. So about 3 weeks ago, I started helping 5 girls who a friend of mine was preaching. He's a pastor, and he was preaching about the story of Dina, how she goes out and she's abused. And so he asked the girls who wanted to share to come to him, and 5 girls came out, all of these below 12. And so we listen to that. So he calls me because you know what to say, like, Racheal, you know how to deal with these kids, come in here. And so I listened to their stories, and one called, I'm not sure but she's called Rashida. And so she's 8, and she tells a story how she was sent to go and buy food. And Posho, I don't know if you know Posho, Hugali, right?
Yeah.
And so she goes and she's attacked by a herdsman, and she's raped, and then she returns home. But in the process, she spilled the posho. When she returned home, she was bleeding, and she was punished for spilling the food. And so she was telling the story, and she has a strong sense of justice. She said, I said to her, what can I do for you? Because usually she would say, oh, take me out of here, or find a boarding alternative. And she said to me, Auntie Racheal, I need to have that guy arrested.
Yes.
And by the grace of God, we were able to arrest the guy. And I was moved. But another girl called Hawa, when we shared with the mother, she said to me, oh, the only thing that happened is that my daughter was molested. No one can hear she was abused. And so I planned a little retreat for them about 2 weeks ago. And she refused. She said, my daughter cannot go. But this is a girl who works like an older woman. She has so much responsibility, but even her story is not hard. But I was asking myself, why wouldn't a woman even believe her daughter? And she knows, because then everyone will see that girl as dirty. Yeah. And so they would rather pretend that it didn't happen because it's safer. It's the safe thing to do. And so then these girls are forced to have resilience. But because no one is challenging the status quo, I'll tell you another story. The week I returned from, shortly after I returned from the UK, I decided to do a community singing program, especially for the girls who didn't go to school. So at first it was actually all girls and boys. So I would invite them, prepare a meal, and then we sing, which didn't work out because children in the slum prefer to dance than singing. They have no time to memorize songs. And one of these girls came. And at that time, a friend of mine had come in. So she put up her hand. She was very restless. And like, we're here to dance, not to hear stories. And then she says to me, which scriptures can I read to be encouraged? And then she says, what do you do if you hate your father? And then she says, how do you kill him? And of course, all the other kids looked in astonishment because they're like, what just happened here? And so we talked to the girl, and then she revealed that her father was abusing her. Her father worked in the countryside between Monday to Friday, and he returned home every Saturday. And every Saturday, they have a small house where about 5 of them lived. And she said they have a curtain that separates the bed from the sitting room. And she was saying, every day I put on extra pants that he won't do it. But my mom can't come out to save me, but he does it. And so I said to her, you know what? I will figure it out. And I went to a friend of mine. I went to another church. It's an affluent church. I said to, the pastor came to me and said, oh, Racheal, we want to come alongside you. We want to support your work. And I said, perfect. You just came in the right day. Yesterday I met this girl, and I shared the story like I have. And then this guy looked at me. No, it was a lady. This lady looks at me and says, Racheal, 3-year-olds in the slum are abused. She's 11. She can handle it. And I said, you didn't say that. And I said to her, then you're not ready to work in the slum. You're not ready to work with me. And the only alternative we had for that girl was to move her into boarding school. And so that's what we try to do. We try to arrange school for them, or take them, especially if they're pregnant, to a pregnancy crisis center where they can get more support than we can offer. And just try to, why we are using boarding school at the moment, my place is not big enough to have children the whole year. And so when we take them to a school, at least it's a way to balance out my life at the moment as we trust the Lord to build a bigger house. But for many of them, as soon as you give up on them, and I already said that, because sometimes, and you'll know this after working in Burundi, sometimes someone will come and say, I want to sponsor a child. And then a year later, they withdraw. For me, that option doesn't exist, because I know if, I let that child go, I know what they're going back into. And some of them have experienced things that I think no one should ever. I went to see one of the girls we have in our care. She ran away when her mom brought a man to sleep with her. And then I returned months later. Her mom was very pregnant at that time, and we had left 3 other young girls at the house. And so I went back to see them, and this woman had been raped. So I said to her, let's take away the children, And she said, Racheal, what are you talking about? They watched the whole thing. They're the ones who screamed until the guy left. And the youngest at that time were 3. So a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 9-year-old, and they had witnessed this. But I think that what we have told ourselves is that we deceive ourselves that these things don't exist. And that's where the real problem is. So it's a very big problem in slum communities.
Well, listen, we're going to put Ufahari details in the blurb at the bottom if people want to get. But you paint such a grim picture, and yet you're doing such absolutely critical work. I know you've come under attack and persecution from the work you're doing. Tell us about that.
Yeah, because part of our work is that we sometimes are lucky to arrest people and have them in prison, and they just won't forgive you. So I've had countless threats of being poisoned, so I'm very, very careful what I eat in the community. And I have had actually to put rules that I don't allow people at my house. I know that's the one I hate most, but it was just as a way to protect myself in a way. I will only have the children that come, but I won't let people come in unless upon invitation. And there have been times when I've been attacked in the community, and it's strange because sometimes you're attacked and then the Lord, protects you as well, because the people who are messed up, but they see the importance of what you're doing. And I remember one time we had just arrested this guy, about 50 years. He had abused a 5-year-old, and I knew his family wasn't happy, and they were hurling insults and stuff. And I was walking in this isolated part of our community, and I was just rushing to go into a car, and these guys just came around me, and clearly you've been around gangs, they have knives and everything, and so they come to attack me. And then this guy just looks at me And he looks like he can recognize me. And then he said, "You must be Auntie Jessica's daughter." And Jessica is my mom.
Yeah.
And he says, "That woman taught us. she loved us. She took care of us." And then she said to the guys, "Back off." And then they walked away. And like, I was terrified and thankful at the same time. I was like, what just happened here? And it was such a spot that if anything happened, they would have killed me and walked away, and no one would have realized. Probably would have seen me on a beam somewhere afterwards. And I've been also in just a moment after that, and I knew it was planned. People were just fighting back. I'm in a taxi as well, and I walk in, and so this guy, as I walk in, there are like two passengers who are men, and then they just lock the door. And this guy says to me, "Oh, you such a beautiful person," which normally doesn't happen to me. I don't hear people say that to me. And then he says, "Oh, you just have a good waist." And then he holds my waist and like, "You will start kissing me right now." And I knew that these were just things that have been set up to terrify me, or there have been times when I've been attacked in the market and people just hurl insults. And I knew it's just people fighting back to say, "Oh, you on our case, we will show you." But I think overall, I have seen the Lord's protection, but then also I know what it means for the children. And I don't think there is any amount of threat that can stop me, well, unless they kill me. And God just gives you wisdom on how to live some places and find places of safety and communities where people appreciate and see you and see what you're doing. So, yeah.
Wow. So you married Calvin in August 2022. Tell us about him.
Yeah, Calvin is a photographer. Pretty much the best photographer I know. What would I say?
I mean, he's marrying into you and 25 girls. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. We met at fashion school. So during COVID, I decided to do some upskilling because some of the girls we have cannot go back to a normal school because of age or stigma and everything. So, but then I realized that many of them look down on skilling projects because then they feel like it's for failures. I wanted to learn better. I knew something, but I wanted to upgrade so that then they can see, oh, if Racheal can do it, then I can do it. Mm-hmm. And then I met him there, and he was working on a documentary on teenage mothers. But you will know this, having been in Burundi. In Africa, churches look down on people that have locks and tattoos, and he has both. And so he had tried to get places where he could do the documentaries and people would sign him out after maybe 2 weeks. And so I said to him, I work with girls. I have an access to a whole community. And so we started working. But then I realized that as he was taking pictures, he was not just looking at how do you make this girl very vulnerable. He was thinking, how do you transfer power to this child? How do you communicate their dreams and hopes? How do you tell their story in a dignifying manner and all that? But also at that time I was dealing with PTSD. I'd been in hospital with a girl. So part of what we do as well is try to offer healthcare for the girls who have been abused. And I'd been in hospital with this girl that had become extremely suicidal. She had been raped, got pregnant, and tried to terminate the pregnancy, and everything just went bad. She had an infection. I mean, everything was going wrong. I'd been with her for 72 hours. And then I came back to help another girl who had lost a child and a family abandoned her. So I was like a priest to this other. And then another child that I know was raped, I hate to say, but in police custody. And so all that. So he came in at that time when I was, and we started talking. And he just helped me in that time when I was dealing with PTSD and anxiety. And I already said to myself, oh, if I get better, I'll surely get rid of him. But...
Oh, wow.
And then we became closer, and it was a roller coaster because, like I said, everyone in the church spaces, and I said to him, I think people were not rejecting him per se, but because I have spoken about truths that no one wants to hear. And I think they were just paying me back for doing that because there is a lot of complacency, sadly, in our churches. Yeah. And but he just found himself there, and it's just been a really big roller coaster for us, navigating that space and we finally have a church where we can go to, but it took us more than a year for us to find a church where we could be fully accepted and celebrated. And he's just, he has a heart for helping young girls. He lost his family when he was young. He was adopted by an American, but he saw how his sister became, victims of sex violence as well. And he just has a heart to support young women, and he wants to do that in a very honoring way. So it was easy. And then also, as a rule in Uganda for young girls, you can't go from antenatal without a man. And so he would disguise as a boyfriend for many of these girls, and would help them get all the facility, the help, getting medicine, access to the health facility. And so, yeah, it felt like he worked out and appreciated the dream. And yeah, that's how the Lord has led us.
Well, big shout out to Kelvin, because marrying the fearless, crazy, turbocharged Racheal must be challenging at times, let alone having 25 girls under their care as well. My goodness. Hi, folks. I hope 2024 has got off to a good start. I think most of you know this podcast comes out on the auspices of Great Lakes Outreach, working in Burundi, which is still annoyingly the hungriest and poorest country in the world. And there are so many positives. I mean, I look back at the last year, see that we've impacted a couple of 100,000 people in a very meaningful way. I've got all these lovely photos of prostitutes that we've helped get out of prostitution, giving them a new skill as tailors. I think of street kids that we've helped get off the streets. Think of microfinance loans that we've given out to poorest of the poor people, mainly widows who have managed to start up businesses and are now thriving, being lifted out of poverty. Mud huts that have been able to knock down and build sort of brick houses with a tin roof and a door that can be locked to actually protect these vulnerable ladies. So many people have come into relationship with Jesus, come to faith. I mean, it's absolutely beautiful. In that context, at the same time, there have been 40% food price rises of basic foodstuffs, and there have been 5 hikes in the last 3 months of fuel, which just adds up to crippling inflation that affects everybody. It's so challenging. So if you want to back us, if you're enjoying the podcast, I'd really appreciate it, you sowing into the work. And that's so you can go do that at greatlakesoutreach.org/inspired. We'd love it for you to journey with us. greatlakesoutreach.org/inspired. And keep enjoying the podcast. Now let's get back to it. So, Racheal, we're sort of coming into land. 2 more questions. One would be, what's your vision moving forward? What's your dream?
Yeah, I mean, I think where I'm at the moment is to amplify the voices of those that have been abused. I think that the conversation has been suppressed. And I think why it is important to tell the story so that then society is awakened to the reality that this is happening, particularly in slum communities. The picture I'm painting is not the whole of Uganda. I'm saying the communities that are, at the bottom of society. So I want the church to be awakened to the reality of those. But then also I think in the process, communicate hope. I think the thing that has grounded me has been that hope in Christ. Paul writes and says, Christ in you, the hope of glory. And it's only Jesus that can bring healing and restoration and give you honor, make you fahari per se. And so I think my desire is to communicate the gospel, but not to the wicked alone, but also to those who have been abused, to say that Christ heals, Christ saves. And so that's a big part of my life. And hopefully I've written a collection of poems. Hopefully I'll find a publisher to just communicate that hope that we have, but also tell the stories of those who have suffered the things. So that's one dream. The other one is, I know that for me, 2 significant things: Jesus changes lives, but education gives that beauty, adds that beauty. And so the dream in the future is to have a school, because we spend a lot of money on education. But as we're dreaming, we'll have a house, but we'll have a school, so that then we can give an opportunity to more children who are going through it. We also have actually a boy in our care. Both girls and boys, an opportunity to be safe, to a place where they can get a meal, a place. So that is my hope in the future, that we'll have a school. And normally schools also help us to communicate that hope. And like I said, Jesus changes lives. And so I hope that as I grow, I continue to get that boldness and courage to speak that hope of Christ to everybody that we see. So
in closing, Racheal, your last sort of parting salvo to fire at us as we listen, how are you going to challenge us?
I think for me, because I believe that people who are listening in love the Lord, and encouragement is to pushing further into the Lord. I am not blind to the struggles in the West. People deal with depression and all those things, many and sometimes believers. And I think that our hope and salvation is in the Lord. But on us, I think that our love for God should push us to express love for others. And you will know that my favorite scripture would be when Jesus said, whatsoever you did for the least of these in Matthew 25, that you did for me. And the question is always to ask, who are the least amongst us? And the least of the brothers sometimes are the children that are sexually abused. And sometimes we want to help them, but just hearing their story. The least amongst us are those who are struggling in war zones. The least amongst us are so many. And my challenge is that for every believer, you should step out and ask yourself, who is that person that the Lord has drawn to me? What is their challenge, and how can I help them live a better life? I know that the church in the West does a good job sending help and stuff, but we need to ask ourselves, what much more can I do to amplify the voices of those that are dealing with hectic situations? What are the things that I can do to help them see the God not only who heals the spirit, but also heals their body? And I think that everyone has the power to do that. And we can do that sometimes by offering a listening ear or just reaching out and giving to make a difference. Hopefully that was not an appeal, but I genuinely think that that's the place of Christians, to be a healing balm, but not only in giving, but also presenting ourselves to be that, and not running away from the places that we fear. I promise you, Simon, when I was living in the UK, I was terrified. It's like I'd never lived in Calais before. And I remember telling Amy's parents when I was leaving, and they said to me, God will preserve you, or he will call you home. And the moments when I despair, and I'm like, God, I'm not sure if you've called me for this. I'm not sure if I can handle. And yet day by day, he gives me his grace to live each day at a time, to help another person and to just live for him, and that he can do for everybody, and we just have to trust him.
Amen. Well, sister, cheering you on. This is a story, and I don't know, it's from your slum, but it was a little girl who was being teased by her friends, and she was a follower of Jesus, and this guy, this friend mocking her said, if God loves you, why doesn't he take care of you? Why doesn't God tell someone to bring you shoes and a warm coat and better food? And the little girl thought for a moment, and then with tears coming to her eyes, she said, I guess he does tell somebody, but somebody forgets. And that's just so poignant, isn't it? May we not be people who forget. May we hear loud and clear.
That's powerful. Yeah. I remember.
Yeah, seriously. And so
maybe we forget.
So our job as followers of Christ is to be his hands and his feet and his mouthpiece. You are being all three. Rach, we cheer you on. Seriously, we cheer you on. I'll put all your details in the blurb. Guys, you can be in direct touch with her if you want to back them. Part of my dream of Inspired was, and literally it happened from the first podcast. When the first podcast we did, someone was donated on the back of that 4 different houses for the homeless. And I just long to see the kingdom of God coming around through this community, this beautiful community of thousands of people listening and serving each other. Those that have financial means can serve those that don't, and we can all encourage it. That's God's kingdom work happening. So bless you, Racheal, Mutesi. Thanks for your time, sister.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me on this platform.
Wonderful. Guys, seriously, it's done what it says on the tin, hasn't it? Be encouraged, be stirred, be challenged, be inspired. If you've enjoyed this, please gossip it with your friends. Get other people to subscribe, sign up. If you want to be in touch with me, simongilbert.com. Give us, please, a great review on Spotify or iTunes. I want to thank Adam Thomas Steer for the editing, Mike Sandeman for the mixing. And next week, we'll be back with a very different, but another fantastic story of inspiring faith. In the meantime, have a good week. God bless you, and toodaloo.